celebrating 50 years of NAASR. Looking back, moving forward.
I want you to take pause and think about a world without NAASR. Having said that, it makes me wonder if we would have the lecture series that we have, if we would have the conferences nationwide, if we would have had 2 chairs in Armenian Studies at Harvard and UCLA.
It's the largest collection of books relating to Armenia, to Armenians, and to Near East in general have been found in the NAASR bookstore.
When I was working in the government of Armenia, we often had no reliable sources, not in the foreign ministry, not in the president's office. I would either call myself, or I'd call my wife, or I'd call someone to call here to NAASR and find out and do some research, and that would help me.
I mean, there's always the question whether information that you're getting about Armenia is reliable. I mean, what I appreciate about NAASR is I don't feel like people are ramming a particular point of view down my throat.
What's unique about NAASR is that it really is the only organization within our community, whether it's here in Boston or across the United States, that provides an academic and an educational underpinning to who we are as a people, a language, a culture. It's a unifying organization to bridge the gap between the different organizations, some of which are educational, some are social, and some are cultural.
I think the most important thing about NAASR is that it documents the existence of Armenians, our history and our current situation worldwide, and not just history, but in arts and politics and science. Anything you could imagine is something that NAASR focuses on.
Well, when we look back on the early days, we never thought we'd ever be around 50 years later.
Hey, set out, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. What will be, will be. Que sera, sera.
Back around 52, 53, I was a student of Professor Fry at Harvard. And I went to him one day and I said, you know, I think it's time that the Armenian community have a chair. So I went out and I talked to what I conceived of as every leader in the community. And I came back and I told Professor Fry there's an absolute consensus to go ahead and try to find support for a chair at Harvard.
This was the first time that a community effort had been made to endow a chair. And that is another reason why the university was extremely skeptical. They said, our chairs are endowed by millionaires who are willing to put their name to it and pay for everything all at once. They said, this has never happened before, and it never had happened before.
But to make a long story dull, a lot of us were relatively young, and in those days, to raise $300,000, the amount that Harvard had indicated was necessary to fund it, that was a major problem.
I said that in order to raise that kind of money, I think you have to go the nickel and dime route.
Manug and I were at the Armenian Students Association annual convention, and we raised this as a project that the Armenian Students Association should undertake. And I think we wound up with 2 votes, Manug's and mine.
Following Professor Fry's talk before the Armenian Students Association, and my talking to other members of the community, particularly Thomas Amirian and Ara Avakian, I wrote a memo to Professor Fry in April of 1954 in which I made these points. There is a valid point that a university like Harvard should show some initiative in aiding the establishment of a program of Armenian studies and research. And we had this initial founding group. And the 3 other people were Fry himself, Yair Shechrakian, and Haig Emanuelian, Dick Malkasian, Jack Gouveyan, and James Ekmekjan. We were trying to find people that represented all segments of the community, politically, culturally, and otherwise. So that between 1954 and 1955, March 2nd, 60 community leaders and Harvard professors eventually came together and introduced NAASR to the community. We laid out the whole program to the community, and it was a packed audience. We asked how many would be willing to join and support this effort, and it was like a unanimous raising of hands. Now, we had gone into that meeting with 60 founding members, and 60 people signed up that night. In the next couple of months or so, we had about 250 people respond, fill out applications that we want to be charter members of the organization.
We decided we'd have to have a kickoff banquet, and what more logical place than the August Harvard Club with walnut paneling on Commonwealth Ave in Boston. And I must say, in those days, the Armenians had not advanced in the community the way they have now. It was almost brazen or perhaps insouciant.
Fry, of course, was there. Professor Langer was there. President Pusey of Harvard was there. And we had the fundraising drive, and we raised, at that banquet, $30,000.
Between 1955 and 1959, NAASR Board Chairman Young and other NAASR leaders crisscrossed the country raising funds for the Harvard Chair.
And so, not too long after we announced the success of the Harvard Chair campaign, not only did we raise $300,000, we raised $388,000. Part of that was a $70,000 grant from the Gulbenkian Foundation.
And I remember Manoogian and I, we just congratulated, hugged each other afterwards. We said, we've made it. And we had.
Then immediately upon the conclusion of the Harvard Chair campaign in 1959, at the 4th Annual Assembly of Members, we decided that the next chair should be in California.
To what is now called the Narigatsi Chair at UCLA was established largely through the work of a local committee here of very dedicated Armenian Americans who found the money and were able to fulfill the commitment that NAASR had made to the University of California for the establishment of that chair.
Third was the permanent program that was established at Columbia University, and NAASR contributed for the maintenance of that program for 10 years until some wealthy person came along and gave the money to establish a chair at Columbia. So we had a lot to do with the first 3 chairs in the United States. The selection of the occupant of the chair would be above and beyond the Armenian community.
In 1969, Robert W. Thompson was named the first occupant of the Harvard Armenian Studies Chair.
And Sirapidena Session was very closely involved with Dumbarton Oaks, and she was the one who really pushed Robert Thompson. And so he had this background. He was a young scholar who had done work in the related areas to the Armenian studies.
In 1993, James R. Russell became the second occupant of the Mesrov Mashtot's chair at Harvard.
Not only did NAASR more or less create the circumstances in which I could work as a scholar, but it also created the publication series which has made my work accessible to readers.